Hello, everyone. We're just going live, so we'll give it a minute to let the system catch up and let everyone into the webinar, and then we'll get going in just a few seconds. Okay, thank you for joining us for this exciting webinar today around cloud email security, where we will be talking about the key design concept for telco, ISP, and hosting provider platforms. I'm Dirk Marski. I'm the Director of Engineering Operations here at Atmail and look after our cloud platforms. Joining me today, we have Gildas Nadan, one of our innovation engineers who is actually specializing in this particular area. We will be talking you through the following topics in the next 25 minutes or so. And I think right now you'll see a poll coming up on your screen. We're just trying to get a bit of a view of where our audience is at in terms of the email systems they currently run. So the few topics we'll be running through is we're looking at how to share responsibility between multiple providers, cloud or other third parties. We'll look at how to securely leverage the cloud toolkit to your advantage and what a consumption-based business model means to your infrastructure and innovation. The webinar will run for about 25 minutes, and then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. Please do submit your questions as we go through it. If we can, we'll answer them right in the middle of the presentation. If not, we'll certainly get to them at the end if we can to do that. The Zoom feature has a Q&A section where you can submit your questions. So, security. It's a very important topic for a lot of us. The moment we deal with user data, large-scale systems, security becomes a very big concern to everyone. News headlines are full of various data breaches over time and millions of records being leaked in various places. We're talking about user accounts, passwords, other ways people get into systems and exploit the information available on those. This is why we thought we'd put together this webinar and talk a bit more about the various concepts on how you can secure your platforms, providing to your customers.
Yes, so one of the important thing when we talk about security is that we need to have a holistic view of security, because the security is only as strong as your weakest point, like a chain. And usually the weak points are present where there's a few gray areas in the responsibility. And in the context where you're not doing everything, you're sharing some of the responsibilities with, let's say, a hosting provider or cloud service provider. The separation of responsibility between those two can contain a lot of gray areas and hence cause issues. And in the specific context of cloud service provider security, this report from 2020 from Oracle and KPMG was stating that only 8% of the cyber leaders fully understand their team's roles in securing the cloud versus the cloud service provider. So we felt that it was really important for us to go through that shared responsibility model and explain what is your responsibility domain and what is your cloud service provider's domain.
And talking about that, we extracted some of the information from the AWS shared responsibility model. We think they have a quite good way of thinking about this. So to clarify the context, here at Atmel, we do use cloud service providers, and we use quite a bit of AWS. We will be commenting and using some of their services throughout the presentation to give examples. There's certainly many more providers out there, Google Cloud Platforms, Azure, IBM Cloud, and others that provide similar sort of services. And all of this is equally applicable to their environments as to AWS. It's just we happen to know a little bit more about AWS, which is why we're using it here. So when talking about shared responsibility, there's really two aspects to it. There's one, the security of the cloud, and then there's the second one, which is the security in the cloud. So what do we mean by that? Security of the cloud, and again, this is more taken from the AWS environment, and there's a lot more material out there. It's the cloud provider's responsibility to secure the cloud itself. That means the infrastructure where it runs, the facilities, the hardware, the software, networking, and the likes. They actually take the payload that we put in there as a kind of more or less black box and just make sure it runs and is fairly safe and secure, isolated container. And they provide us a lot of tools to then secure our own way of running that. And that's where the second part is, as consumers of the cloud service provider infrastructure, we then need to are responsible for securing what we put in there. And that means the configuration that falls under our responsibility, making sure that we do things like least privilege access patterns. We have safe firewall rules in place. There's no point in them having very safe infrastructure if we say everybody can get to it, and this sort of thing. So that's really where the kind of differentiation is, and the line can be made. Now, in order to talk you through this in a bit more detail, we thought we'll give a concrete example of how an as a service is set up. And rather than just picking any random application, we thought we'd talk about something exciting that hopefully everybody likes, and that's pizza.
Yes, everyone loves pizza indeed. So say you want to run your pizza as a service, and we've borrowed those slides from Paul Kerrison, by the way. So in the good old world of homemade pizza, you're basically responsible for everything from the utilities up to the conversation. Now, you may think this is perfectly fine and you can deal with all of those things, but you've probably already organized a dinner with friends where you were so busy working in a kitchen that you couldn't really pay that much attention to your friends and the conversation. And that's definitely not where you want to be. Plus, you may think that you can deal with all of that, but on your own. But the reality is, you're going to make wood fire pizza, obviously, because they are the best, right? So what happens if your oven cracks? Are you going to fix it yourself with fire bricks and refractory mortar, or are you going to call someone who specializes in that? And the same could be, say, of your utilities. What if the electricity goes down? Are you going to fix it yourself? Are you going to, bring your own source of power? I'm not really sure. So this is a good thing. You could leverage all the services in the cloud, and instead of having to take care of that all of them yourself or those utilities, you could rely on this instead. But as you can see, you're still responsible for all the part from the fire up to the conversation. And as we know, we're talking about security. Fire can be dangerous. So you probably still need to have an extinguisher and a fire blanket and know how to use them, right? So this is where you could leverage some of the more high-level services, such as container as a service, something like a managed Kubernetes instance, a platform as a service, or even some other managed services like a managed database, or all the way up to function as a service, Lambda, where you only concentrate on the actual function, which is purely your business value, right? Now, obviously, it's the more to the right, the more managed it is, the smaller your security footprint and your area of responsibility, but not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily apply to all your your workload. There's not necessarily a business case for it. And AWS mentions that in their cloud adoption framework, they have this those 6 R's. So they say when you move from on-premise to the cloud, you have certain approaches that you can mix and match. You can either remove a workload, you can retain the on-premise workload, you can decide to re-platform, to rehost, to refactor, or even to repurchase. And what does repurchase mean? It means that instead of trying to migrate that workload yourself, you buy a product on the shelf, and off the shelf rather. And this is what a software as a service solution will provide you. You can just concentrate on that conversation. So in the case of email as a service, well, this is exactly what Admail provides. And you know, all you have to do is make sure that the configuration is right, that the look and feel of the webmail, you know, is the same as the rest of your digital assets. So it really reduces the amount of things you have to take care of. And to get back to the pizza as a service model, you know, if you're in the business of making pizza, if you're a pizzeria, you might want to make the best pizza out there, and so you have to deal with that. But if you're in a party business and pizza is only one of the services that you provide, you might want to buy the best pizza out there. And when it comes to email, we believe that it's Atmail.
So on this front, actually, we have a second poll we'd like to ask you, which is more about what is the kind of service you already do? Are you already maybe on the cloud journey? And what are you doing? So just to reiterate, I think the pizza is a very good example. Here at Atmail, we do use cloud services. We, as we said earlier, we work with AWS and other cloud platform providers to provide our own clouds. And that actually means we use exactly the same model. We are a company specializing in email, and that's where our value add is. But there's a lot of other services that we, for example, just outsource and don't really say, if we don't have to do the heavy lifting, why would we? I'm talking about the likes of databases, making sure they're highly available there. We need one, yes. Do I need to really worry about how that works? Well, if somebody can do it for me, why not? Caching is very similar. We try and outsource that, log aggregation and the likes. So I think it's really important to figure out what matters to your business, where's your unique value add, and what is the things you maybe don't care as much about and would consider outsourcing. So I think we've now talked a lot about the value of the cloud, what it can bring to you, and how you can leverage those sorts of things. Now, what you probably also will be aware of is the relatively consistent feed of news headlines around various DDoS attacks, be that individual companies or also these big cloud providers. So here, for example, the number that really is striking is the AWS being hit with a record 2.3 terabytes per second DDoS attack. Now that's an awful lot of bandwidth, and probably not a lot of people would be able to sustain that. But also makes you wonder, well, if I put my workload in AWS, am I subject to that attack, and how do I protect myself from that? And I think that's a very relevant question in this security day and age. And there's actually a kind of really interesting way to think about this. So here's a quote from Vivek Kundra, former White House CIO, who basically pointed out that cloud computing is often far more secure than traditional computing because Google and Amazon can attract and retain cybersecurity personnel of a higher quality than many governmental agencies. If I was to put that in a sport context, and the way I like to think about it is, these guys have a lot of threats and a lot of attacks hitting them, which means that they have to exercise, practice to be ready for them, but also they get to deal with them on a regular basis. Now in sport, you have your professional athletes practice 5 days a week and then play the match at the weekend. They're getting good at it, they're getting better at it because there's this constant iteration of what they need to do. Now take that to your hobbyists that play maybe once a month and don't actually practice maybe more than once or twice in that month. Obviously, they're going to come in a lot less prepared. In the security context, if you've probably dealt with crises before or incidents, you'll find that actually quite often you don't have as much time to practice those things, and that's maybe why those situations don't run quite as smoothly as you was hoping for. So I actually think there's something to it. These guys are under constant threat and attack, which means they are much, much better prepared for it. and they actually share some of those tools with you to actually protect yourselves as well.
Yeah, so that's a really good point. And on that bandwidth note, you know, I don't think that there's a lot of company that can have 2.3 terabits per second of bandwidth available to their data center, let alone some to waste on DDoS attacks. And this is where the cloud really helps as well, because they are fully leveraging economies of scale. They have absolutely humongous data centers full of servers. They can allow, you know, they can afford to pay a lot for bandwidth. And as you mentioned, when they created those infrastructure, they had to make sure that they could still maintain those vast amounts of resources, physical resources. And for that, they did a really big job in terms of being able to manage those things and making them configurable through APIs. And it turns out that those tools, they also make them available to you. So when you move to the cloud, de facto, you get this really mature set of tools that you leverage yourself. And in that context, everything is an API. So now you can easily control your identity and access management. You can get all your logs stored in one place. You can have a trail of all the API calls. You also have an API to capture network traffic if you want to. It's really it's in a security context. It's really good to be able to leverage all those tools that are pre-existing rather than bring your own. And because everything is an API, you can now describe your infrastructure as code and describe the intent rather than the method to get there, and then have an engine execute on that and bring up your infrastructure. And that means that you can have that in your continuous integration pipeline, the continuous deployment pipeline. And since you have that pipeline that builds your infrastructure, you can also now, in that pipeline, add continuous compliance. You can check, for instance, that you're not opening port 22 on the internet, you know, before deploying a workload. And this is a big trend in the industry. You've probably seen those words, DevSecOps, everywhere. You can add to that CI/CD pipeline things like checking for credentials in your source code, making sure that your workload is secure, making sure that you're passing all your compliance checks, which could also be things like CIS hardening, and it can go all the way up to running fuzzing on your code base, or checking for dependencies which have known security issues. So that puts you in a much better situation, or position rather. And I think this is one of those key takeaway, is that this is a brand new design paradigm. You can automate everything. You can guarantee that you have least privileges. And instead of spending a lot of time waiting for new hardware to be provisioned, you can put up your infrastructure in a couple of seconds, which means that you can easily do that in a test environment, and run all your security scanning, and then wrap it down.
And with that dynamic nature, kind of comes to this pay-as-you-go infrastructure concept. There's two diagrams here on this slide. I just want to talk you through and take attention to. So on the left-hand side, you got your on-premise scenario. On the right-hand side, more the kind of cloud infrastructure type scenario. Now, this is about capacity over time, and the blue line kind of indicates the demand that can vary quite a lot, even single days and the likes. And then the red line is the provision capacity that you need in order to cope with that demand. Now, in an on-premise world, you tend to kind of just provision static servers, deploy them, set them up, configure them, they sit there, and you need to design them in a way to be able to cope with your peak demand, which occurs on email solution. That's probably your 8 till 9 a.m. on a Monday morning when everybody gets in after weekend and checks their email first thing. That's certainly when we see a certain amount of peak. Now, the rest of the week, that means that you're probably going to run under that demand, and you have a fair share of capacity that is just not used. Now, in a cloud environment, you would use a lot more of this on-demand capacity. So you would provision enough for the deal with the Monday morning peak. And the rest of the time, you'll probably scale back quite a bit. Make sure you have plenty to deal with the demand coming through, but there's nothing idle going around. And that actually saves you quite a few dollars that you can then spend somewhere else in the business on other things. Now, a lot of people think about this in terms of compute, memory, and the likes, because that is just a very easy concept to understand. I personally think there's more to it, because you can actually do the exact same thing with the services. As Gildas just pointed out, everything is an API. So, for example, you've got a tricky problem you need to debug in your infrastructure. You can turn on a lot more sophisticated debugging and analytics methodologies, let's say for a week or two, in order to get to the bottom of that thing. Running those permanently would probably be quite costly and probably not to give you a lot of value. For that 1 or 2 weeks where you switch it on, though, to get to the bottom of it, you may find you get there a lot faster. Costs a certain amount of money, but you get really sophisticated tools for a pretty small investment, to be honest. And the best thing, once you've gotten to the bottom of your issue, you just switch it back off again, and everything goes back to normal. So you've just got a boost to your team in terms of insights and tooling for the exact amount of time you needed. And those actually evolve quite rapidly.
Yeah, so this is a very good point. And back in 2006, when Amazon started Amazon Web Services, Jeff Bezos said in an interview, there's a lot of undifferentiated heavy lifting that stands between your idea and that success. And that would be with my cap as an innovation engineer on. You know, of course, you could do all that groundwork. You could spend your time investing on integrating the APIs of your switches, servers. You know, you could spend time having even like a CI/CD pipeline to deploy your services, servers, patches, whatever. But does it make sense from a business perspective? Maybe not. You know, and to be able to be in a place where you can have the level of security that your business needs, you might have to spend a really long time and a lot of money that could be better used somewhere else. The same way that instead of provisioning all your physical servers for a peak capacity, you know, and paying all that money up front when you're not using them, you just pay what you use, and then you use that money for other things that make more sense for your business. So I think it's really important to be in a situation where you can spend that time, money, resources on things that provide the most value for your business, and to be able to innovate. Now, when it comes to infrastructure, there is indeed a lot of undifferentiated heavy lifting, and you're better off not having to do that work yourself. And that's really what the cloud and all those APIs provide you. Plus, they have some really really nifty services that they've been launching. Like Dirk mentioned, if you try to understand what's happening with your cloud security at the moment, you can still use some, you know, some event tracing or management software such as Splunk and the likes. But you can aggregate all the sources of event that you get from CloudWatch and the like, and now get them processed through artificial intelligence. AWS has launched Guard Duty, which does exactly that. They will be able to learn, establish the baseline, and then you know, let you know when there's something that gets out of that baseline. Only a couple of months ago, this was just a dream for you know, the security folks out there, and now this is just a service you can turn on with a, you know, with a click. I think it's pretty amazing. So, as a cloud company doing SaaS, we'd better be in a place where we try to innovate on the products that you guys would be using. anti-abuse, time of click protection, and all those things in a cloud context are much easier to do, because if you want to launch and build a new service, you don't have to wait a long period of time to get new service to provision this service on. You can quickly launch a small, elastic set of resources that will be running this service. You can expose it to the customers without putting your security posture in danger, because this is going to be a separate platform. And then if that service takes off, it's perfect. You can just provision more resources, respond to the demand. And again, that would be a separate service from what provides the core of the business. So there's no impact, there's no issue here. You've reduced your blast radius to the minimum. And if that service doesn't work, well, that happens when you innovate. Sometimes you fail. You just, turn it off, reduce the infrastructure and resources affected to it, and you move on to the next innovation.
And with that, we're actually starting to come to the end of the webinar session. So just to summarize again what we've spoken about, we really believe it's very important that you understand what type of pizza as a service your business needs. Are you that wood-fired pizzeria that really needs to care about the oven and the fire and the likes? Are you more party services would like to buy the best pizza in town and get on with other things? And that applies to a lot of things, I think, around the business. Where's the unique value proposition? What do you really need to focus on versus what should you just buy off the shelf and get other people to do for you? As you just pointed out, the cloud takes care of the undifferentiated heavy lifting, and that is on a lot of ways, in particular also around the security. We spoke initially about the shared security model and how that impacts you. Understanding who owns what is very important, but equally, whatever you don't own, somebody else is taking care of for you, and something less for you to worry about. And because it's their core business, they will do a really good job at it. So with that, actually, we believe you can't secure an on-premise environment to the same level as the cloud equivalent at the same cost. And that's really the key thing there. We just spoke about all these little services. You can just switch them off when you need them, or the ones, and pick and choose what really matters to your business, disregarding all the other options that AWS is providing to its broad customer base. Or as I mentioned earlier, GCP, IBM Cloud, Microsoft Azure, and others, they all provide similar services. We just use the AWS references as we know them quite well. And last point is the cloud really allows you to innovate, and it allows you to innovate fast and do it in a very secured way. So we've seen this internally in a few projects where we had to get other people involved. You open up that little endpoint, you open that very tightly monitored network interface, and you know exactly who has access to your platform, what they're doing. And if something doesn't go to plan, you just lock that down, you're back in where you need to be. So it's a very secure, fine point of integration. I think that really helps with that. Now that's the main part of our content. I think we've got quite a couple of questions come through the webinar, so let's have a look at them now.
Yeah, so there's actually a question about what you just mentioned. So how is securing a cloud environment any different from securing a traditional data center? Do you want to have a go at this one first?
Yes, I will certainly. So how is it any different? I think at the core concepts of it, I personally believe that securing on-prem versus cloud is the same thing. The real differentiation to me comes who does what. On-premise, you have to worry about your facility. You need to make sure that there's security guards going around that and that you can't just walk into it, steal hard drives. I think the story's out on the internet for that. You need to make sure your networks are there. Your power supplies, right? That's obviously a vulnerable thing of a physical installation. Make sure you've got backup generators and all those work. In cloud, that's still true. The thing is, somebody else is doing it for you and you don't have to worry about it. Now, there's one thing that we do need to highlight though between cloud and on-prem, because cloud is all API and kind of interface driven. You've actually got now a new attack vector that you need to worry about. Which is exactly those, your credentials into your cloud environment. Pretty sure if you Google it, there will be quite a few horror stories where people got rooted, people got access to their accounts and basically just shut down the infrastructure or started using it for other things like, I think, mining Bitcoins. I think, Gildas, you've got a few more comments on that.
Yeah, Bitcoin mining is is a very uh, like real risk. And this is kind of what I was saying when I was talking about this DevSecOps pipeline. You definitely want to be checking that you're not leaking any credentials, you're not exposing any AWS credentials or hard code them inside your Git repositories. But again, this is a space where AWS, for instance, will provide through CloudTrail, would provide you a list of all the API calls, so you can have security alerts there. You can react, and obviously this is a different threat model, so you need to adapt your threat model to what you're doing and to the cloud, and you need to design accordingly, and that's an important thing. But the tools are there. Like you just have to build on top of them, and in order to respond to a kind of threat, like you said, your cloud infrastructure is being shut down. Yes, you need to have a disaster recovery plan. You need to have a business continuity plan. In the AWS world, they highly recommend that you duplicate all your data into separate accounts, potentially in a different region. So if that happens, again, you've limited the blast radius. You still have a way to recover those data and take over. But in an on-prem world, you also have to have a business continuity plan and disaster recovery. It's just harder. So I think at the end of the day, it's similar.
So I'm just looking through here. I think there's another really good question, and that's probably more for you, Gilda, which is it possible to use a cloud-based platform, infrastructure as a service or software as a service, since we have regulatory constraints such as data locality and GDPR? And I think that's actually a question a lot of people wonder about because of GDPR, HIPAA, ISO, PCI DSS. It's quite a common question.
Yes, I mean, there's always certain workloads that will need to be, secured in a way or another. I don't know if you're dealing with emails that may contain some personal information or some medical records of things. You might need to be HIPAA compliant. Myself, I know more about PCI DSS because I've used to work in the past in a company that had a PCI DSS workload in AWS. So it shows that it's entirely possible. And again, we get back to the shared security or shared responsibility model rather. The cloud providers, they will get their infrastructure and some of the services certified with pretty much all the framework out there. HIPAA, PCI DSS, ISO, you name it. It's more than likely that their part of the work is covered. You still have to take care of the things that are your responsibility. So for instance, if you're using VMs, the OS need to be secured in a certain way. If you're doing PCI DSS, for instance, and your practices need to also, be compliant. But I found that because you have all those CI/CD things, it's easier to talk to whoever is doing the auditing and show them that you have this who, what, when, how traceability all throughout your workload, and it's much better to be you're in a much better posture to actually get that compliance.
Thanks for the details there. And I think actually what's worth mentioning, we have first-hand experience because Atmail is actually GDPR compliant on multiple cloud platforms. So we've done it ourselves. We know it's feasible, but it's a common question out there. So I think that's where we're going to stop for today. I think we've answered all the questions. We really hope that this was useful for you. So thank you very much for spending this time with us today, and hopefully you learned something. If you've got any questions, feel free to send us an email. And if you're on the look for an email platform, we do provide those too. So thanks very much, and see you. Bye.
Bye.